Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Wisconsin gearing up for a high-profile election next year with an open governor's race and Democrats hoping to gain control of the state legislature. Current Democratic Governor Tony Evers is not seeking a third term, leaving that seat open. Several candidates campaigning today. Chief political reporter Jason Zimmerman is live in the Fox Valley newsroom with the latest on that. Jason.
Cammie, just one day after announcing his campaign for governor and pledging to repeal Act 10 if elected, former Lieutenant Governor and Democrat Mandela Barnes is speaking to reporters and taking questions for the first time. He did so this morning in Wauwatosa, with other stops still to come in Madison and Green Bay, according to his campaign. Barnes previously ran for U.S. Senate 3 years ago, losing to Ron Johnson by less than 27,000 votes. Despite polls showing him to be an immediate frontrunner, that loss has led to some, including the black-owned Milwaukee Courier newspaper, saying he should step aside. This is what Barnes said in response to that editorial.
I don't take a single vote for granted. Fight hard wherever. As a Milwaukee native, as somebody who's been, who's born and raised in Milwaukee, a product of Milwaukee schools, and I think about the race in 22. It got more votes than anybody in the city of Milwaukee ever in a midterm election. But that doesn't mean I'm just going to assume folks are going to vote for me again.
On the Republican side, only two people are running, Congressman Tom Tiffany and Washington County Executive Josh Schoeman. The race for governor on the Democratic side of the ballot is now a crowded one, which includes current Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez, Milwaukee County Executive David Crawley, State Senator Kelda Roys, State Representative Francesca Hung, and former Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation CEO Missy Hughes, and that's just to name a few. During a Zoom interview, I asked Crawley about the notion of Barnes being the front runner.
I don't necessarily, think that, name ID equals being the front runner. I think that is part of the messaging campaign that is being put out there because there are individuals who, quite frankly, don't want folks to succeed in this race.
Current Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez is holding an event tonight in Appleton at 5:30 at the Democratic Party headquarters. We'll hear from her tonight at 10 o'clock. Reporting live in the Fox Valley Newsroom, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.